Today we're once again blending together a bunch of different ideas, and even better, this one is playable. Ooh, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dev Diary, a series where I try to make my own video games. So if game dev videos are your thing, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss future videos. So we're still technically a few months out from summer, but today's project just felt like it was meant for the squirts. And so similarly to the last few squirts related projects, the gameplay is like your typical top-down action shooter. The player controls their character with WASD and fires with the left click, and the dodge roll also returns, which can be done by pressing or holding right click. Again, very standard setup for not only squirts play, but your typical top-down shooter. What's less typical is, the rest of what surrounds the project. But first, a little backstory. Like half a year ago, I tried to translate the card game War into a video game. If you're not familiar with War, it's basically a game of RNG where each player draws a card, and the higher number wins, collecting both cards until one player has no cards left to lose. And aside from getting a few of the rules wrong, the attempt to create a virtual version was passable. And a link to that video can be found in the description in case you haven't seen it, along with some squirts playlists for those interested. Anyway, I bring this up because the concept of the War card game is what powers our turn to the squirts for this project, one that I call deck squirts. At the start of the round, each squirt is given a deck of cards. The player starts with a standard 52 card set, and the enemies are given cards based on the current difficulty level. After a certain amount of time, a new card for each squirt is drawn, and this card determines how much damage that squirt will do. So a 2 will deal 2 damage, and a king will deal like 13. From there, it's typical top-down shooter shenanigans, and if the player manages to survive, then next comes the fun part, which is a quick reminder that if you enjoy the content, supporting me on Patreon is the best way to help me keep making it. Doing so can get you access to exclusive content and downloads, and even early access to the weekly Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube. So, inspired by Balatro, the player is presented with a few options. Modify their deck or manage their jokers. If they choose to add a card, the player is presented with the option to add one of 3 random cards to their deck. Removing a card is as one would expect, giving the player the option to remove a card from their deck. Each quote-unquote page displays up to 91 cards at a time and can be navigated with the scroll wheel, arrow keys, or W and S respectively. And finally, managing jokers introduces the third and final aspect of our little game. Now there are 10 different jokers to play with. Most of these jokers simply alter the user's movement speed, fire rate, or damage output, but there are a couple that have specific uses. For example, Bouncer will have all the user's projectiles ricochet on contact instead of destroying itself like normal. The Vampire Joker will sometimes heal the user when doing damage. And then there's the Heartless, which will double the damage for any card under 3. Now I know, a lot of these aren't very interesting. The plan was to make jokers more synergistic and experimental, but I just unfortunately did not have the time. Though the Heartless Joker does show the potential for what is possible with the current system, as it's able to not only read card numbers, but the suit as well. In fact, just about any information can be passed through the Joker system to apply gameplay changes. It's just a matter of knowing, what to change. Anyway, each squirt can hold up to 2 jokers, but after 2, one must replace an old joker, or skip the option entirely. And indeed, once an option is chosen, the player must commit to that choice. Now once a choice, even if that choice is to make no choice, is made, a new round starts and the loop repeats until the player loses. As the rounds continue, the enemies will get stronger in both their deck pools and their health pools. And even worse, they'll eventually start using jokers themselves. Now each joker is color-coded, which honestly was kind of a bad idea because even with just 10, I started running out of options. Nevertheless, this was done to make it easier to help identify which jokers are in play. However, should the player want a refresher, they can pause the game and see all of the squirts data at any time, including their jokers. And at this point, I think it's time to address the obvious. These menus are pretty ugly. Basic at best, somewhat of an eyesore at worst. But they're functional, and sadly it was all that I was able to really manage with the time I had. Funny enough, a huge chunk of time was spent building these menus and all the interactive bits, and GameMaker just released an update that supposedly makes things like menu navigation easier to do. But by the time that update dropped, like 90% of this menu had already been coded. Anyway, other than the obvious lack of content, generally speaking, speaking, I really like the ideas tried in this one, and kinda wish I had more time to flesh them out, you know? Which I might do in the future, so I'm actually curious to get some feedback on this one. As such, I have uploaded a playable version of this project on my Patreon, so if you are a patron, be sure to check it out and let me know what you think. But don't worry if Patreon ain't your thing, I would still love to know what you think of the idea. Like, what type of jokers would you add to the game? What kind of content should we add next? I always love to hear from y'all, so be sure to share your thoughts and ideas in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.